Again, we're looking forward to engaging our panel today, connecting with one another around teaching restorative justice in an undergraduate curriculum. We have essentially 3 stages for today's work. We're gonna, in a moment, I'll ask the panelists to just introduce themselves and a little bit about their origins with restorative justice. Then we'll go into a deeper dive into the initiatives, programs, and curriculum that they're working on with restorative justice. And then we're going to be opening it up for questions from all of you. So feel free throughout the talk to submit any questions that you'd like. You can submit those directly to Gwen as one of the moderators, and we will try and work through those questions as best we can. We'll also have a few poll questions throughout our time together, asking you to respond to a few questions just to get a sense of who is out there and the type of work that you're doing. So Gwen, let's start with our first poll question, if you have that ready. All right, so Gwen's got a poll question. You should be able to select an option. So tell us about the academic department that you might be seeking to integrate restorative justice into. Where are you working? What discipline are you a part of? Let us know where you're at. And we'll be sharing those results at the end of our introduction. So I want to move right into that while you are introducing yourself, or while you're doing that poll question. I want to begin to introduce our panelists. So I'd like to begin with asking Annie to kick us off and tell us a little about your origins with RJ and about how you use it in your undergraduate teaching.
Well, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. My name is Annie Rhodey Wright. I use she, her, hers pronouns. I'm a lawyer. I teach criminal justice at Siena College, which is a private liberal arts college in upstate New York, Albany, New York. And as to the question of how I first learned of RJ and why it's important to my teaching pursuits with undergrads, to be honest, I can't remember how I first learned of RJ, probably through youth court involvement. But I know that I've been teaching based heavily on RJ principles since I started at Siena in 2009. But I think I need to unpack that a little bit, because I don't mean that my classes aren't engaged in RJ circles or that we pass a talking stick around as individuals speak. What I mean is that I teach to engender empathy, to build bridges, and to make change happen. And this is also reinforced by the Franciscan values of the college at which I teach, which has a clear mission of social justice. So I'm a firm believer in experiential learning, AKA the chocolate cake theory of teaching. And what I mean by that is I could talk to you all day about all the deliciousness of chocolate cake and every delicious angle, the smell, the look, the feel, the taste. But if I just give you one taste of it, you'll get it. So what that means for my teaching is that I try to expose my undergrads in every way possible to subjects, to the people that we are studying. So as Westmore, one of my heroes who wrote The Other Westmore, among other things, puts it, I'm forever striving to collapse the distance between disparate or even unfamiliar groups. And I want my students to experience what it's like for somebody to have to really fight for the right to an education behind bars. I want my students to understand what it's like to come home from prison, having never used a computer, and every job that you want to apply to, you have to apply to online because all the job apps are online now. Or what it feels like to be a mother who's fighting for custody of her kids when she comes home from prison. Or what it feels like for a kid to have to engage in some illegal activities to help his family pay the rent. And so through field work and field trips and webinars and podcasts and theater productions and guest speakers, my students gain overall, they gain a compassion and then empathy for the other. And that's really the sweet spot, right? Because once there's empathy, seeds are sown for advocacy. And we can begin to strategize how to advocate for the needs of individuals that we've either worked closely with or that maybe we've studied from afar, but needs that our connections to them have revealed. So if empathy isn't sparked, people might not understand what needs to be fixed, and they won't likely be motivated to act to fix it. So I think it takes radical, I like to call it radical empathy, to catalyze change. And so one example of that is that my students at Siena helped me teach in prison by peer reviewing the work of my incarcerated students. And my incarcerated students help peer review the work of my students at Siena. And through this, barriers disappear and bridges are built, and the other becomes a peer And to me, that is the essence of restorative justice. That's what I got.
Thank you so much, Annie. Looking forward to hearing more about that. Martha, tell us a little about yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Martha Hurley, and I'm the chair of the Criminal Justice and Security Studies Department at the University of Dayton. I've been here about 5 years now, and my pronouns are she, her, hers. As a criminal justice scholar, I've long been concerned about the overemphasis on punishment as the dominant response to crime in the U.S. We have a system that seemed to me overly harsh, that neglects to consider the root causes of crime, and that really restricts or limits input from those who have been harmed. And little is expected of those who are responsible for harm. And I first learned about RJ, which is an alternative that diverts people away as a graduate student. I learned the philosophy, quite honestly, but not the practice. I was intrigued by the notion that we could implement something that gave victims a voice, and that would hold those responsible accountable in a way that was different from just incarceration. And I initially focused around 2008, 2009 on how restorative justice might be utilized via the reentry process and victim wraparound types of services, and published a small article that sort of talked about the state of restorative justice in prisons around the country. But again, it was more focused on philosophy, information sharing, and programs, not active involvement with restorative justice and how to transform the system. So despite having published on restorative justice in institutional settings and ruminating over the importance of involving victims, I really didn't do much with RJ for a very long time. It was not until I came to the University of Dayton in 2017 that I started reflecting on the things that were happening in criminal justice, my role as an academic researcher, as a professor, as someone who really believes that it's important to connect with community. So I started researching RJ again, and this time around, focusing more on the applied nature than the philosophy. And I came to believe that as a criminal justice professor, I could create an education process that was an alternative to the traditional system that we have in the US right now, a criminal justice education system that's focused on training, but doesn't focus on educating the types of professionals we need in order to transform the system. And so I thought here at UD, I could come in as program director and later chair and transform the way we educate future criminal justice professionals by shifting from the traditional academic approach to an approach that focuses on community engagement in the community, to a classroom design that was less hierarchical to the extent possible, that was focused on accountability and shared instruction, a shift from an extensive focus on learning about system and punishment to one that was focused on dialogue and engagement and transformation, to one that embraced restorative pedagogy. And so there's not a criminal justice major at the University of Dayton who will graduate without connection to community, without understanding alternatives to incarceration, without understanding their role in the system. And so we now have, as we'll talk about later, a host of options happening on campus that's counter to the traditional criminal justice education curriculum found on college campuses. Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Brandy, could I pass the space to you?
Sure. So, hi, everybody. My name is Brandy Egan. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I work at Siena College. I work alongside Annie, but in a completely different department. So my background is in neuroscience. So I didn't hear about restorative justice until Well, my PhD, I did a lot of rat studies, and let's say rats, they're kind of like humans, but I don't think rats do restorative justice. So after my PhD, I transitioned into studying diversity and inclusion. After that is when I met up with someone that was doing amazing work at the former institution I was at. And she was the one that introduced me to restorative justice. And through that, we've tried to apply restorative justice practices to repairing the harm that happens in healthcare. So there's a lot of data out there that shows the further you progress in your healthcare career, say you're going from your undergraduate to your medical school, to your residency, to your fellowship afterwards, your empathy actually goes down. So why is that the case? Particularly, I'm interested in the brain basis of things like that and trying to explain experientially. Annie mentioned how experiential learning is a thing. So experientially, how that progresses from stage to stage to stage in your career. So basically, we kind of in healthcare, and as you're probably saying, well, this might be in every field, but as people progress along farther and farther and farther, we've got the cycle of losing empathy and losing empathy and losing empathy. So we have been trying to start initiatives to train our graduate studies, our medical students, physician assistant students, and things like that in restorative justice practices and how we can use it to repair harm in healthcare within the system itself and within the patient and provider experience. But also, I work in an undergraduate institution now, so I'm interested in just starting right off the bat. So specifically, I work in a nursing program. And the efforts that I've had, been trying to do are to try to teach my early nurses, this is what you're in for. It's going to be a hard path to get where you are. We've got a nursing shortage and we've got a lot of abuse in healthcare. But if we learn about these restorative practices and we practice these restorative things, then we could potentially use this tool to help correct everything in the future. So specifically, I've developed a workshop alongside our graduate studies program, kind of a junior level workshop where we work with these students to talk about social determinants of health. So we talk about, again, along as what Annie was saying, what I want my students to see and to feel and to understand by the time they get through our course is that not necessarily all patients have access to pharmacies, have access to fresh food, have access to the things that they might have. And coming from a small liberal arts college, it's definitely an eye-opening experience for a lot of students. A lot of students feel, reporting after we do our studies, they say, wow, they say, thank you. So we are trying to get this here, not only into the nursing program, but into all pre-med tracks or preclinical tracks where people are going to be working with patients so that, again, we could start off the bat talking about this and hopefully work to decrease that whole, we lose our empathy as we progress along, because empathy leads to advocacy, and we've got some of that, but we don't have enough of that. So hopefully my goal is to start these students now in understanding this and using these practices later, bringing them to wherever they go afterwards to start to build community that we need in healthcare. And with that, I will pass to Sahara.
Thanks, Brandy. Hi, everyone. So my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am actually located outside of Oakland, California on unceded Saklan land. And I first learned about restorative justice, I think it was about 8 years ago at a conference, and Fania Davis was the keynote speaker. And so she talked about it and she contrasted the restorative justice's restorative model against the U.S. criminal system's retributive model. And that really resonated with me. But for a long time, I assumed that I didn't have any opportunity to actually connect on a deeper level. So I assumed that restorative justice was only really used in legal settings. And so my background is in critical pedagogy. And so I work to apply a critical theory of education to interrogate why and how I teach, and then understand, always situate that in a container of wanting to create a more just society. And so while I had been more generally supportive of restorative justice over the years, I came to begin to integrate what I thought of as restorative pedagogies or restorative teaching practices. And one of the things that I've noticed is, rather than, I haven't necessarily been, trying to count the number of students who are appreciative or anything like that at this point, but I have noticed that as I'm designing my courses, by intentionally kind of opening space for restorative pedagogies and looking to see how my understandings of critical pedagogy or critical teaching integrated with also with my focus on experiential learning or critical civic and community engagement. There's a lot of critical in there, but incorporating restorative practices, I feel that it has helped me to design classes with more heart and more warmth and more respect for different ways of being and knowing. And so while that's been something that is important to me, I'm always looking for ways to demonstrate it, to implement policies, or to create assignments, or to select readings, or create activities that demonstrate this my understanding that aside from coming into the political science space, or in addition to coming into the classroom, no matter what the topic is, I want my students to know that they can bring their whole selves. And I emphasize the fact that we are creating a classroom community together. And then in doing that, my guiding question has always been, as I really think about, okay, well, how am I using restorative practices, or how do I want to use them? My question I keep coming back to is, well, what needs to be restored? What needs to be restored in our classroom communities? What am I seeing and feeling and hearing myself, and what is coming up for me from my students being in this particular institution of higher education, understanding some of the trends, especially the corporatist trends across the board in higher education. And so I come back to that question repeatedly, and I build on it, and I allow it to serve as a foundation. And then I see myself as curating my courses around that question. So because I'm a political scientist, we're practicing politics, and we're learning habits that allow us to be political actors. And in doing that, I incorporate very simple pedagogies or practices, which I'll talk about in a little bit, but I try to do it. It's not just about the practice, it's kind of the orientation I have and the motivation I have for incorporating them. And then also my willingness to continue to be flexible, which also speaks to a restorative approach, so that I can actually respond to my students' needs. So I will pause and leave it at that for now.
Thank you, everyone, for introducing yourself. Such a variety of not only academic disciplines, but ways of approaching the teaching enterprise. So prior to the introductions, we did a poll question around what academic departments folks are from or teaching in. And Gwen, if we can go ahead and share those results, I think we'll see a similar variety in the audience today, and even a good handful of folks checking the other box. So disciplines that at least weren't on the top of my mind or others' minds. And so that's that's really interesting, and gives us a lot of hope for ways in which restorative justice can be brought onto our campuses and throughout our curriculum. Wonderful. So before we move into a round of asking about your current initiatives and projects from our panelists, I want to put together another poll question for everyone. Over to our panelists. Start again with Annie. Come to you and tell us a little bit about some of what's going on your campus and some of the initiatives that you're involved in related to restorative justice and the undergraduate teaching. Oh, you're on mute, though.
Thank you. I actually am going to focus mostly on one particular initiative that I'm working on. So hope that doesn't disappoint. But well, first of all, thank you so much for giving up your time today and inviting me to share this space with you and to join in this conversation about things that matter. Coincidentally, time, space, and matter are the organizing principles of Nicole Fleetwood's award-winning text, Marking Time, Art in the Age of Incarceration, which I'm going to demonstrate right here. So this is the book that my colleague and I are going to be using to construct this course. So, and the book is about the process of art creation behind bars, but more importantly, the book is about the artists who create the art and the impacts that mass incarceration has had on them and on us as a society. So this text, which my colleague Melissa Saris and I, she's in the creative arts department at Siena, we use that book to envision our soon to be launched Art in the Carceral State course, which could frankly be subtitled From Observation to Empathy to Advocacy. In her book, Fleetwood discusses the plethora of challenges that incarcerated, or as she calls them, unfree artists face due to the limitations on available time, space, and matter. And when she talks about matter, she means like the resources and the materials available to use behind bars to create art. And I don't have the time to delve into each of these categories, but one interesting thing from the jump about Fleetwood's categories of time, space, and matter as a whole is that, at least notable in my lawyer's brain, are the echoes of the constitutional framework of time, place, and manner. Those are the three types of restrictions the government uses to limit our freedom of expression. So the government can put certain limitations on our freedom of expression, such as not allowing specific demonstrations really late at night or really early in the morning. They can restrict the number of signs or the placement of signs on government property, as long as the limitations are content neutral, narrowly tailored, and there is some alternate means of expression. So it seems too coincidental to me for Fleetwood to have chosen the organizing principles of time, space, and matter to discuss limitations on artistic expression behind bars without at least a nod to time, place, and manner restrictions on free speech in the free world. But I digress. In her book, Fleetwood discusses how prison dehumanizes and disrupts, and that the creation of art is a way to heal and to connect and to regain the humanity that is stolen from individuals behind bars. And she says ultimately that art is about identity, invisibility, absence from society, despair, and devastation. And so what's magical about art, we all know, is that it grabs the viewer, and not necessarily intellectually at first, but in the gut, emotionally. It has the power to humanize and to connect the artist to the viewer. And that's what Melissa and I want to seize upon in this multi-layered course. So for the artist, there's healing in the creation process. But to get to that healing, as with everything in prison, there's a struggle. And it takes patience and resourcefulness and grit and even endurance to create art behind bars. And so the point is, no one behind bars creates art casually. It is very intentional. It's driven by emotion and by passion about something. So in this course that we're creating that is supposed to launch in the spring of 2023, Melissa and I want to capture that passion, and we want to use it to repair the harm done to these artists and their fellow non-artists through mass incarceration. So specifically, our students are going to learn about mass incarceration, and then they're going to delve into studying art. Certain pieces of art could be studio art, could be performance art, art in any form, created by currently and formerly incarcerated artists, to find out what fuels their work. And the goal is then to advocate for what the artists need. And in that way, to ameliorate or possibly even dismantle some aspects of the carceral system. So first, understanding the depth and breadth of mass incarceration will require that our students learn the history of mass incarceration and its disproportionate impacts on minority communities. So a few of the authors that will help get us there are Nicole Hannah-Jones, Ta-Nehisi Coates, Isabel Wilkerson, Heather McGee, Clint Smith, Richard Rothstein, and of course, Michelle Alexander. And this understanding of the history of mass incarceration will start to sow the seeds of compassion in our students. And then to further nurture these seeds, our students will study select works of art, sometimes with the help of formerly incarcerated artists who will come in as guest artists, to try to glean what the artist is expressing, asking for, missing, needing, wanting. So Mary Baxter's video, recreating her own labor and delivery behind bars while shackled to a table, is a really good example of an artist expressing a criminal justice reform need. But a poignant painting of a child and parent might be a subtler plea for extended or enhanced visiting policies at a jail or a prison. So because our students aren't likely to have ever known the experience of incarceration, we can't completely hope to get into the minds of the artists that we're studying, but we will attempt to place on them the time, space, and matter restrictions that artists behind bars face. So for instance, artist Jesse Crimes, who is featured in Fleetwood's book, discusses the difficulty of locating materials to use behind bars, and he has to resort to contraband, like bed sheets, like certain hair gels. And other artists in the book mention things like springs from staplers, screwdrivers, pins, needles, copper wires, anything that they can find or lift from the prison grounds or facilities. So Crimes reported that he actually enjoyed using prison contraband in his art and as a means of creating his art out of an act of rebellion. And he said he's using the system against itself in that way. And I thought that was particularly delightful. But so our students will have their hands at Crimes' complicated hair gel printing process, and will learn the struggles of painting with a toothbrush, making colors from Kool-Aid powder and Skittles. And after our students have tried to replicate the methods and using the materials of the artists that we're studying, we'll strategize how to advocate for what the artists appear to want or need. And this is really if we had to name it, the tangible repair the harm portion of the course, though frankly, I think the entire journey is one of engendering and nurturing empathy for those behind bars and how this impacts them, their families, and their communities. So that empathy alone is restorative in the dignity and respect grown for the justice impacted, but it's also the necessary spark to ignite the efforts towards advocacy and ultimately repair. So just to close out, in terms of tangible advocacy, some examples could be lobbying for extended and enhanced visitation policies at a local jail or surrounding prisons, holding panel discussions on campus regarding impacts of mass incarceration, and then encouraging students to volunteer with criminal justice reform advocacy groups, planning a community garden at a local jail or prison and organizing how it will be planted and maintained by those serving time there, hosting gallery art shows of works by incarcerated or formerly incarcerated artists. Actually, we have a gallery show in the works. Teaching yoga, art, journaling, mindfulness in local jails or prisons. Basically, we just hope to be the artists' voices and arms and legs on the outside. And in that way, repair a scintilla of the harm done by mass incarceration. So that's the scores.
Thank you so much, Annie. Thank you for sharing that course that you're in the midst of developing, and it sounds like it's quite far along. Martha, as we start to hand off to you, I'm going to remind everyone to feel free to submit any questions that you're having along the way to one of the moderators, and we will make sure that that's addressed later on in the panel. Martha, I pass it over to you.
Great, thank you. I just want to go back and say that where I started in this movement at the University of Dayton was from this place of thinking that there's a real opportunity to change the way future criminal justice professionals think about the system and the way they think about justice-involved constituents that they might someday be asked to serve. And that, to my way of thinking, we have in the US this criminal justice education that focuses on training, but it's not the kind that we need to educate for. And that as a bachelor's degree granting institution with a criminal justice major, we needed to shift the focus away from traditional academic models, away from hierarchical structures, and think about ways to engage criminal justice majors who might be fairly rigid in their way of thinking about the system and justice-involved citizens. We have 4 years to make it happen, to introduce concepts and to challenge them and to humanize the populations that they'd be expected to serve, and to help generate a path where they might generate some empathy for those that they'll be expected to serve. And so I was able to, here at the University of Dayton, which is a Catholic Marianist institution, to sort of integrate the Catholic Marianist perspective and Catholic social teaching and system change as part of something that would drive the CJS major. And restorative justice seemed an approach that brought those things together. So in 2018, I pitched the then Dean, Jason Pierce, that what criminal justice at UD really needed was an emphasis on restorative justice that would run throughout a course that our students would then carry over into work into the community. And really felt like in order to do that, I couldn't just live personally at the philosophical level, that I needed to be educated and I needed to train and learn how to engage in restorative practices myself And it's great to say that now we have this opportunity where we are teaching, I'm teaching here at University of Dayton, the first restorative justice class to undergraduate students. It's a class that asks students to think in a radically different way about their understanding of the system and responses to the system and their approach to justice involved in at-risk populations. So the course is interdisciplinary in nature. Students explore and are introduced to the principles of RJ. They explore the indigenous roots of RJ, that this is not something new. We talk about conflict resolution and peace building, alternative ways of handling not just harms caused by the system, not just harms against individuals, but we also talk about conflict and peace building as something each of us, those skills, each of us could utilize in our own personal interactions with one another. So I moved from this system criminal justice focus to talking with students now in this class about how do you use RJ skills in your everyday life, on campus, with your roommate in a variety of settings. And then we take a step back and they learn the process, they learn the how to do and engage in restorative justice practices. They learn the context for engaging in restorative justice practices as tools for within the system and outside of it. Once they learn those skills, they have the background and they learn the skills. In the RJ class here at University of Dayton that I teach, they also have to facilitate a circle by the end of the semester. So it's history, it's the context, it's the application, it's actually also the doing in part. And what I'm finding, again, this is the first semester, what I'm finding from these CJS majors is that they're reporting that this experience about learning about RJ, seeing it in application, doing it, has changed the way they think about the system, about justice-involved populations, about their own relationship with one another. And so how did we get there? Well, it's also a restorative pedagogical approach. So we actually, in this RJ class, we circle up and we talk about current conflict issues related to the criminal justice system. So when we talk about race and policing, we do that in circle in the classroom. And students have embraced that opportunity to share their stories and voice. I think it is leading to some transformation in thinking and in responding. They have proposed ideas for how to take restorative justice notions into the community. And when I say community, I'm talking broad-based, the community on campus, as well as the broader community in and around the city of Dayton. And so there's this intersection between gaining knowledge about restorative justice and what it means, as well as the use of restorative pedagogy to generate critical thinking in the classroom. The assignments there are reflective journaling assignments. So if we have something that's really controversial that we talk about in class, students have an opportunity to share in circle, but also to reflect in writing through the journaling process. They have to design and facilitate a community building circle, and that can take a variety of forms, and they've done an amazing job with that, as well as general response papers based on what we know from the literature about restorative justice. So this first class at University of Dayton, I think, is going well. And I should say the university has approved, the academic curriculum committee has approved the restorative justice class at the University of Dayton as a part of its common academic program, or you would think of this as gen eds. And so we're seeing it via this class. The faculty in CJS are also embracing restorative pedagogical approaches, in that in our American violence class, that faculty member also asked students to sort of circle up to talk about some pretty controversial things related to history and violence in America. And we're seeing it as well here with faculty utilizing it as part of our criminal justice ethics class. So we are on a journey here at the University of Dayton to create a criminal justice major that does embrace restorative justice, not just as a tool for external use, but also as part of restorative pedagogical approaches. And so I will just kind of leave it there to say, we have a class, we're on this journey where we're moving toward a practicum-oriented class, and where faculty are embracing aspects of restorative pedagogy as a tool for those criminal justice issues that are likely to be divisive, generate conflict, as a way to give voice to students from a variety of backgrounds. And I'll just kind of leave it there and pass.
Thank you so much, Martha. Wonderful work. Brandy, would you like to follow up?
Sure. So jumping off of all the wonderful things that Martha just said, that's also a pipeline dream of our school in developing our new criminal justice major, that Annie is playing a great role in that. So taking my little spin off of the criminal justice side, what I'm interested in terms of restorative justice is how every single person in this meeting can use restorative justice in their classroom, whether you teach criminal justice or behavioral neuroscience like me. There's different ways that you can integrate these practices in your classroom. So one thing that I've done is I've developed a workshop, and it's focused on the fact that basically we've got all of these race-associated differences in health outcomes. They're well documented, they exist, and they need to be talked about. So in this workshop, we have piloted it with nursing students, and our nursing students, they get to their second year of nursing school. We have a bachelor's degree in nursing. So their second year, they're in the clinical experiences where they're one-on-one, face-to-face with our patients. So they're right there. They're on the front lines already at 17, 18, 19 years old. So we want to begin these conversations earlier. So in this workshop that we introduced them to do, we actually introduced it to them in their community public health course. But this workshop focuses on basically giving the students launching pads for discussing these health disparities that we see. So you might be familiar with Camara Jones's work. She is one of the leaders in health equity. And we use different analogies. She uses different analogies as, again, a launch pad for helping these conversations to happen. So one of the things that we start with is this flower pot analogy that has to do with 3 different levels of racism. So we've got personally mediated racism, we've got institutionalized racism, and we've got internalized racism. And we start to have the students think about themselves and do self-reflection and do a kind of assessment of where they're at. And then we jumped to applying that to public health. So another analogy that she uses is this cliff analogy. And in this cliff analogy, they show the impact of social conditions on health. So, racism, poverty, other inequities, and how they have, differently affect different populations. You can picture it, you're on a cliff, and some populations are pushed closer to the edge of the cliff. Not only are these populations pushed over the cliff of good health is where this analogy comes in. Some of them have prevention mechanisms to stop them from falling and hitting the ground below. So if you imagine 2 different populations, some are closer to the end of the cliff, and some that actually fell have different access. Maybe some have a net to catch them on the way down. Maybe some of them, when they hit the ground, they have an ambulance, but their ambulance has a flat tire. It's a perfect analogy, again, a simple analogy to use to get our, 17, 18, 19-year-old nursing students ready to have this discussion, ready to start seeing and start talking about the fact that, again, there are these huge inequities and the inequities that these have on their patients' health outcomes. So that's overall what we want to do in our course, and my course in this workshop that I do is, again, give the students the tools that they need to start having these difficult discussions. And also, in addition to, doing the workshop and talking about all that, we have the basic foundational, just what is restorative justice? Why can we use it? How can we use it? How can you use it in practice to repair harm? I've had a lot of feedback from students trying to use restorative justice practices between their cohort and different leaders, the nurse educators in their clinical rotations and things like that, and talking about how again, as I mentioned before, kind of we're perpetuating harms as we move through that system. So whether it's between the preceptor and the nursing student, or whether it's between the nursing student or the nurse themselves and their future patient, it's all about understanding these different inequities. So we really use restorative justice as a launch pad to start having these difficult conversations. And I'm sure you all know that it is very difficult, but we've found really good feedback and really good success with using these nice little analogies, using these small groups to get people to look around at what it is, what are you doing, what are your own biases that you have, and looking them straight in the face and saying, this is what I'm going to do better. So it's really great to be having these conversations with these students at a really young age, because we do see positive outcomes from this. And our nurses are learning at our school on this foundational caring science curriculum. And we really, really, really stress this relationship and holistic care as one thing that we really want for all of our graduates to have. So restorative justice falls right into the curriculum here. And hopefully by the time all of our nursing students at least graduate, they'll be exposed to what is restorative justice, how can we use it, and how can we use it to better treat our patients. And like I said, we do want to expand across other majors. And in addition to that, working with the new criminal justice major, I've got a big background in restorative justice, so I'm working to create a course like Martha was talking about, that is going to be a practicum. It's going to be the practical part where the students themselves are actually experiencing, this is how I become a trained restorative justice practitioner. And we're hoping to do a lot of things with that, hopefully maybe moving to a certificate for any kind of graduates. And again, I just want to emphasize that it doesn't just have to be criminal justice majors. It can be pre-health majors as well. It could be nursing majors. It could be social work majors. Anybody that's having that interaction with patients is really where I'm at. And that's so many different fields. So I will leave it with that and pass it to Zahara.
Yeah, thanks. So these are great. I love the examples. I love hearing about the different ways that everyone our different understandings of restorative justice, and then the ways that we implement that understanding, depending not only on our field, or our discipline, but the institution where we're at. And so again, for me, when I start with that question of, what needs to be restored, and I started asking that about 5 years ago. So, and it was because I was feeling that, of course, my students were coming to me with a range of issues. They had, things going on in their lives. Many times they'd be distracted. And then kind of layering onto that, in the political science classroom, we discuss a lot of issues that they usually reveal instances of either historical and or contemporary injustice. And that's something, so I wanted to create a balance, because I definitely want to expose my students to information and hopefully teach them about things that maybe they did not know in my classrooms. And so, for example, one of the curriculum pieces that students often respond with, well, why didn't we learn about this in elementary school or in high school, is when I teach them about the Great Law of Peace in my Intro to American Politics class. So we learn about the Constitution first because that's familiar, but then I introduce the Great Law of Peace as the Constitution that was created by the indigenous people of America. Some estimates say 700, 800 years before the Constitution. And then we talk about many of the elements that were borrowed from the Great Law of Peace that are included in the Constitution. And so that invariably leads to a discussion. Students ask that question, well, why didn't we learn about this? And sometimes it takes them a minute to kind of look around and ask, did anybody else not know about this? And so on the one hand, I think it's important, and I'm gratified to be providing them with information and giving them a chance to connect with it and to engage with it. On the other hand, though, because students bring their whole selves to the classroom, and I encourage that, that means that when they learn about some examples of injustice, they become upset, they get depressed, or sometimes they may feel, just emotional in general, or they may feel defensive. And so for me, having a restorative approach to teaching politics has been key, because, as I said, it allows me to bring heart and warmth into the design of my courses. So I teach my focus is American politics. And so I teach things like Intro to American Politics. I've taught race, media, and politics. I've taught classes on campaigns and elections, or Congress and the president. And But in addition to that, here at St. Mary's, we have what's called a seminar program, which is like a great books program where all of the students, all the first year students are in seminar one, reading text together, and it's definitely discussion based, it's student led. But by encouraging engagement, regardless of the course, it's been important to me to rely on my understanding of restorative justice and bring those understandings into the way I design the course before the students even come into the classroom. So that influences what texts I choose. And I've started using the word text instead of readings because I broaden my, my thinking to include not only written text, but photography and poetry and films and video clips and other ways that students can learn and other ways of communicating important information in my classrooms. It also speaks to how I've started scaffolding my assignments so that one builds on another, so that there's a sense of coherence and interconnectivity. Rather than being so concerned with having a certain number of assignments, I'm really focused on the depth. And I want students from the time they enter the class, as we go through the class and build our community together, by the end of the semester, I want them to feel enriched, and I want them to feel that they have a deeper understanding of our subjects, not just that we've covered lots of different things. And I'd also say, because I have a really intentional focus on being an equity educator, and I've taken a few workshops because I was really curious to really understand what that means. And so for me, what that means, one of the things is to be willing to acknowledge, first and foremost, that students are coming from a variety of backgrounds. They've had different experiences, and some are better prepared for my classroom and for what I might expect than others. And so rather than assuming everybody, regardless of where they come from, everyone has to do the same kind of work in my classrooms, I offer assignments that are low stakes, lots of writing draft and submitting drafts for maybe a check or a no check if you don't do it. But what I do is I provide extensive feedback so that the students get a sense that regardless of where you're starting, here is my specific feedback for you. So somewhat tailoring the educational experience, and then also making it clear that I'm not expecting every student to produce in the same way, but I am wanting each student to reach and to grow and develop. And so the feedback that I give, that's really important as far as when I go back and when they submit their final draft. That's what I'm looking for. To what degree did you take the feedback into account? Or what questions did you have for me to help you understand the feedback? And then as far as, my restorative approach really influences the kind of day-to-day functioning of my classroom as a community. So whether it's, creating our community agreements, but also referring to them often throughout the semester and having them visible, posting them up every day that we have class. The use of names, so that I make sure the students know I am learning their names, and then I call on them by name, and I encourage them to talk to each other and learn each other's names. Our seat structure, of course, because we organize our seats into a circle, and of course that facilitates that community building. But then also, in addition to that kind of day-to-day, because I'm really focused on public pedagogies, and so I've been I'm volunteering to be an instructor for a Know Your Rights course for a local nonprofit that's working with juvenile court-involved youth. And I'm a visiting teacher at the East Bay Meditation Center, which is here in Oakland, and then also the Spirit Rock Meditation Center, which is in Marin County, kind of near San Francisco. But I've been integrating this idea that public pedagogy means I have an opportunity to expand my work as an educator beyond the higher education classroom. And so, similar to, to what some others of us has talked about, I think it's really been important for me to recognize these multiple opportunities to integrate restorative practices. And so just, I can mention or give you more detail about it, some of the specifics of what I do, but anything from at the very beginning of class, setting an intentional transition and setting the standard, explaining to students that we take our 45 seconds at the beginning of each class. I have a meditation timer, and we sit. We're coming from different spaces. We've all had a day before we come into the classroom, but we sit, the bell rings, and it's usually just enough time to take about 3 breaths together. But even something as simple as that, because we're intentional about it, it challenges the expectation of always kind of being productive and being on the move, being willing to just kind of be together. We also learn about the practice of bearing witness. And so again, when I mentioned some of the emotions that students feel when we learn about injustices, and not just historical, but also contemporary. So I took the time and I integrated into the semester to take time. First, we learn about this practice of bearing witness, but then we pause throughout the semester and return to it. And we talk about not only what the readings or the texts were, but how did we feel? And what did we have to do to help keep ourselves grounded and to inspire a sense of agency that even though we're learning about some horrific things, this not turning away, this being willing to explore our empathy and to be open, and then to come into the classroom and really engage on a deep level, that is a practice of bearing witness, and it is an action, and it's an important political action. So those are just a few examples, and I'm happy to share more if anyone has any questions, but I'll go ahead and hand it back over to Sean.
Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing about what you're involved in and your courses and your initiatives. Please submit your questions to either Gwen or myself, and we'll try and get those out in front of the panelists. So as we transition into sort of an open Q&A period, Gwen, would you share the poll results again? And I'll just direct folks to scroll down to poll number 2. And where we asked about key topics or concerns you have about integrating RJ into the undergraduate curriculum. We see a wide variety, multiple answers for being provided. So quite a bit of need out there. And hopefully as a community, and certainly our panelists can weigh in on any one of these things that you think could be, that you might have advice or insight into, or just a little tip to help people move further down the road. But we'll offer these up for folks to consider and reflect upon as we move into the second part, or this part with the open Q&A. So with our first question that we do have, and this one's directed to Zara, but invite Zara maybe to start, and then anyone else who has insight on this question can weigh in. But the individual's asking about if you run into students who are willfully ignorant and remain blind to disparities and their causes, it mentions the political tribalism that's so strong these days. How do you engage those students in your restorative practice and in your coursework?
Yeah, so I have found that I've actually been surprised the opposite, because, so the example I gave with the Great Law of Peace, I introduced it, and I remember the first time I introduced it, and every time really, rather than being heavy-handed with it and saying, here's an example of a great injustice that you probably didn't know about, I introduce it the same way we talk about the Constitution. And I provide them with information. I provide them with multiple texts and resources so that they can confirm. And then I create an opportunity for us to kind of discuss what we're learning, but it's in continuity, right? So it's not just a random topic. It's related to what we just learned about the American Constitution. And so I think by attending to kind of those aspects, it's kind of like structural, right? It's not really about what the material is. It's about how I introduce the material. And like I said, I don't tell students, you probably don't know about this. Every single class, it's a student who has kind of looked at other students and said, is there anyone who didn't know about this, or am I the only one? And for those students who maybe feel, because I have some students who felt like defensive, or maybe they would say, well, we don't know that the founding fathers stole. And then again, because we're creating a classroom community, unless a student is, that's a perfectly appropriate question or comment. I work to encourage everyone to see themselves as having the ability to respond. And 9 times out of 10, it's another student who says, we didn't say that they stole, but here are elements that are the same. And if this Constitution was created 800 years before, and there's documented evidence that there was interaction, then one how or another, there's a connection here. And I really appreciate that. So the statement that I make is that is through that process of creating community agreements that we all have to be respectful of one another, that we need to listen, try to listen to understand rather than to be understood. And I think because we refer to them repeatedly, I don't wait until something negative has happened. We refer to them, and I actually give students commendations. I'll say at the beginning of class, maybe every couple of months or so. I really appreciate how we're adhering to the agreements, and you all are having not superficial conversations, really in-depth conversations, but you are being respectful, and I see you being willing to change your minds and to take in new information. And so I try to rely on that structure so that when there's a student who's willfully ignorant, that's fine. I'm not there to make them want to learn, but we can proceed and that doesn't disrupt the class, because I can just they can't make the argument that this is irrelevant or that this is being unfairly presented or anything like that. So if they don't want to know and they wish they didn't, that's on them and that's their own personal work. But I don't feel that I have to get into making them believe or making them support the structure of the classroom.
Thank you. Would anybody else want to respond to that or add on?
I would just say this semester, I can't emphasize enough how having those collective guidelines up front is critical in those times. And so I too put up the guideline every class. Those guidelines are put up and I ask the question, is there anything, given what we're talking about today, is there anything else we need to add in order to help us discuss whatever the issue is for the day, and consistently doing that and calling attention to those guidelines. And also upfront, I think at the beginning of the class, sharing a little bit about why those guidelines, why that shared agreement is so important for discourse, I think is essential.
Thank you, Martha. And so there's another question that's probably related to this one that I'll put out, and then we'll continue on this line of thinking. But a lot of what you shared around how you teach restorative justice experientially and getting students to really lean in or live into these hard, complicated topics, they're also very much lived experiences for a lot of students, and students who've had to come face to face with it throughout their lives. So how do you think about trauma and trauma-informed teaching as you engage in some of this subject matter? Anybody like to take that one?
I think for me, when I'm thinking about trauma-informed teaching, I'm also thinking about who my students are going to be interacting with when they're doing field work. So I want them to be really trauma-informed, and I want them to be sensitive to signs of trauma, and to be sort of armed, if I can use that, armed with resources for guiding people towards organizations that can help them or people that can help them. So I was sending students out to do field work for a few years before I realized that I was really doing them and my school a disservice, because I wasn't sitting down with them and making sure they were culturally competent, but now it's also about being trauma informed. So, it's important to know that the people they're going to be working with, let's say at a reentry center, they're going to be helping someone to learn how to use a computer so they can apply for a job. It's important that they understand that the reason that person went to prison was probably due to some sort of trauma. And then what they experienced in prison was another kind of trauma. So my students have to be sensitive to that and respectful of that. They have to learn how to be good listeners. I had a colleague who used to say, you got to know what help looks like. And I want to make sure that my students know how to help people, especially when they've endured some sort of trauma, treating people with dignity. So, yeah, that's what I'd say.
I guess I would probably add to that. I really felt like in starting this journey towards RJ that I needed to be informed more as the instructor on the signs of trauma, because so much of what we talk about in criminal justice classes in particular can really bring to mind traumatic events. And so step one for me was doing some self-education. Also, after each class, I also engage in self-reflection about, okay, what happened in circle that day and are there things I need to do? Provided resources up front. Here's what's available on campus, giving students the space to step away, which is very hard to do. That's not a traditional teaching kind of model, but recognizing that there are things we might discuss in circle, particularly involving the criminal justice system and justice involved at-risk populations that might be triggering, that might generate some emotion. And so I also spent time talking about strategies for dealing with emotions during class. And so we actually engage in a process of, okay, let's just sit here and breathe. Something as simple as breathing together. We've also set up a space in the CJS office that any student can come and sit in that space and gather themselves. We don't ask any questions. You come here, you show up, and you ask to sit in that room, and we take a step back and allow you to just be. And so that is a part of the trauma-informed approach in the restorative class that I teach. I would also say that we start every class transitioning into that space. So we have a class playlist that was generated by the students. So the first couple of minutes, it's really sort of hitting that reset from wherever you came from, and then doing a general check-in round. And we also do checkout rounds. And sometimes what comes out in that checkout round is okay, we need to step aside for a moment and I need to maybe revisit something in the next class. And so there is a lot of attention in the CJS approach here to trauma-informed teaching.
Yeah, I can add on to that. Again, being the outsider, not teaching in criminal justice, I teach psychopharmacology, and it's really interesting to just have discussions on drug abuse and just a basic argument of should we use the word addiction or should we use the word substance abuse disorder, and how that ties back into different family roots. So it's amazing, again, how we do this through the circle process in the classroom, and it gets all the students talking. And again, that could be triggering for some people. So again, restorative justice can really be tied into the most random classes. We talk about the pharmacological actions of methamphetamine in the brain, but we again still use it in the same setting of the restorative justice approaches. So across the board, and as Martha was saying, it is definitely a learning process. I've learned so much, and it's so important to be in tune with what's going on in your students' heads as well. So I'm definitely still learning there and appreciative of kind of this new lens to look at things.
Sean, do you mind if I add something?
Please go right ahead.
I was just thinking that the reason I created the practice of bearing witness, I created this a little text because I pulled together several. I did some research on it first, but it was because in another segment of my Intro to American Politics class, I had a piece where it was a video, and it was on a Native American Sioux reservation. And it was all true, the information was there, but it was really powerful and very depressing. And and when I first showed it, I didn't think about that. I'm also a social worker, and I didn't put my social work hat on. And so I sat and watched it by myself, of course, and I screened it. But I was prepared. And so when I showed it in class, though, that was the first time I realized my students are really hurt. They're hurting. And I was trying to think kind of on the spot, what do I do with this? Because I didn't mean to take them to that place. And so unfortunately, that was the end of that class, the end of that session. And so I had to think about that. I had to rethink and recognize that it's not just about, the information being true or it's important to learn, but I certainly didn't want to be creating trauma in my students and then certainly not like sending them off with that. And so I talked it over with my daughter. Actually, she's 25 now, and she's always been like my teaching assistant. And I asked her, what can I do so that I am presenting the information and we can have a discussion, but I'm creating space for students to acknowledge how they're feeling. And I don't want to lie and say everything is just great, but how do I create a balance here? And so we started talking about bearing witness. And I told her how I had heard about it kind of in religious terms, and it had always been curious and interesting to me. And we talked about how that would apply, because a lot of times we just feel helpless, and that's what leads to that depressed feeling. If you learn something and it's awful, and then class is dismissed and you have no idea like how to process it or what to do with it, but you also don't necessarily know what you can do, and you may not have the power to affect change. And so I think it's really important. It's been important for me to kind of continue having that conversation with myself, so that trauma-informed pedagogy is even beyond kind of what I first started with. So thinking about like ability and disability, and thinking about using more inclusive language, more invitational language. So yeah, I just see it as like an ongoing and unfolding conversation. And so I appreciate, I just had a conversation about adding movement in my meditation teachers group. We talked about how sitting still is prioritized as meditation. And if you can't sit still, or if that's not the way that works for you, movement isn't really addressed. And so I just think there are so many, and for others, like telling people, bring your attention into your body, that creates trauma for whatever reason, because it's not associated with positive experiences. So I just really appreciate how my eyes are being opened continuously to really think about and reflect on the ways that my class can be as inclusive as possible.
Can I just add one thing? I think that we're kind of lucky that we've gone through, as a society, we've gone through COVID together, because that's something that I have so many students that, and we all do have, who are hurting from this. But it's something that we can actually seize upon to get them to understand the trauma that others go through, to sort of channel their pain into something else. So what I'm thinking is, it's not the same as going through incarceration, but I can say to them, how COVID has impacted you, your family, your friends, your community, your school. That's what it's like when you go away and you're incarcerated. It impacts, you and your family and your society, your community. I think that's been a helpful thing for what I do. So just saying, even though it has introduced a lot of trauma into my students in my classroom, it's helpful to help them channel it in a way.
Wonderful thoughts. There's a question in the chat from John about any experience with restorative justice in regard to the care of creation in our common home. At least I understand that to be around the environment and sustainability. But any thoughts? Does anybody have experience or exposure to that? Might be something to ponder on. So if others in the audience have thoughts on that one, perhaps you can help direct us to a resource or something that can take that a little further. Just as we start to wind up on time, I think a final question I want to put is, and I'm going to kind of combine two questions here, is any advice for engaging other areas of campus and getting support for your initiatives? Any tips or advice on that? And how did you know you were ready to teach restorative justice? Tips and readiness.
I'll start with readiness, being the junior one on this panel. I never feel ready. I'm always reflecting on how to be better, but it's not, restorative justice is an awesome tool because it's not about you leading the conversation. It's about you giving everybody the equal opportunity to participate in the conversation. So from that regard, it's actually pretty easy, but constantly learning, constantly getting better at it. And yeah, anyone can do it. So in terms of engaging in the community, there's a lot of initiatives across campus to do restorative justice practices. I just want to warn anybody that I personally feel like restorative justice done not well, that's probably bad English, but anyways, not done well could cause more harm than you actually not doing it all. So it's so important to build that foundation, and that's where we're starting. We're kind of starting at square one, at least at our school right now, and some of our the lovely other people on this panel have a lot more progress than we are. But I do fear a department grabbing it up and saying, we're going to do this, we're going to do circles, we're going to do this, we're going to do this community building. And like I said, sometimes that isn't necessarily the greatest approach, which is difficult for me because I'm dive right in, this is the greatest thing. But sometimes you have to take a step back and do your own small thing and then allow it to kind of blossom across campus, which is, I think, a place that we're in right now. So if anybody wants to talk about how it's progressed, go ahead on their campus.
I can share here at UD. People were already doing RJ before I came. They just weren't doing it on the academic side. And so student development, Bill Fisher and others had already started this process of engaging with RJ in response to student-related issues. And so it was very nice for me because that meant that I already had a support network sort of built in. It just hadn't translated over to the academic side. And now what we're seeing here is this sort of expansion, this movement of coalition building, bringing all those pieces together, the student development piece. And now we've got the Title IX folks are also adding some restorative elements. And we've got this academic piece. It's our next step, I really feel like, is, from my perspective, is to come together and really determine how do we take this thing campus-wide? What does that look like? How do we engage more with students? I know the students in the intro to RJ class, they're already thinking about how they could maybe do some things on the student side that are not connected to the student code of conduct or violations, but more around community building. So what do we do with that? And so I really think on a campus, finding like-minded people who might not even know they're doing RJ or some element of it is key. And then engaging in some buy-in building, because RJ is not the easiest thing to get buy-in on. And as far as readiness to teach, I totally agree with Brandy on this one. Doing some foundation building is important, but the circles go where they go. And so I don't know that you can ever fully be ready for what might come out in a circle in a class on a particular topic, no matter what the discipline in, because you don't know how what's said in circle might strike someone, how it might strike and how you might respond. So being prepared with resources is important, but you learn by doing, and I feel like you get better at it. If you had asked me at the beginning of the semester what I thought about where this class would go, I was a lot more insecure about it. But as the weeks have gone on and students have acclimated and are more responsive and engaged, I feel like it's just getting better, but it didn't start there necessarily.
And so I noticed the link that was put in the chat, the earthrestorativejustice.org. And one thing that I thought of, Sean, when you read that question, was I had asked my students just what I thought was a simple question to first start by, identifying an issue that they care about, and then, kind of talk about like, why is that about, what are their values and how does it connect? And then I asked them, what was their vision for how things could be improved? And they could answer the first two, but every single one of them, at least on their first draft, when they were asked about their vision, they really said, well, I don't think anything can be done. It's not realistic. It's going to be too hard, some version of that. And after reading, 30 papers where they said this, I realized like something as simple as asking students to envision, it required us to ease into it. And so we had a class conversation, and they talked about specifically the climate crisis and the feeling they have of kind of hopelessness. And so they could talk about the issues, they could talk about the problems, but they were afraid to even think about a possibility for a vision because they, as they said, it's not realistic, it's not going to happen. So why kind of put yourself out there that way? So I've really been thinking a lot about kind of engaging in specific actions with my students. So for example, we had a field trip and we went to a climate strike. So we learned about, you know, the issues, but then we all went, and it was a small act, but it was acting together. And so I've been thinking about how can I, rather than just kind of telling them how important it is to have a vision, so that when you do get a chance to affect change, and you'd be surprised, you know, when they come up. But if you don't have a vision, if you haven't even thought about what you would do differently, then you're not prepared and you missed an opportunity. And so I've been thinking about how to demonstrate that with my students, in addition to kind of, you know, having conversations about it. So I think that's I think it kind of speaks to the question of how, you know, how to care for our earth restoratively. I think that's going to be necessary. But I had that there was an unexpected obstacle, the fact that my students didn't even really want to consider possibilities because they were so they felt so negatively about the prospects for anything being done.
Thank you for linking back to that, Zara. Appreciate it. Well, we're starting to come up on our 90-minute mark, so we want to share a few final resources for you. In poll question number 3, Gwen, if you'll publish that real quick. I mean, there was a lot of resources and things, if you scroll down, that people were saying they need, and this list certainly is not all encompassing. We want you to know that the Restorative Justice Network of Catholic campuses through the Center for Restorative Justice at USD is ideally going to be a resource for you. So we invite you to check out the website, see some of the resources that are available, upcoming enrichment series opportunities, trainings, and so forth, or just people who are involved in RJ and finding your community in this bigger RJ community. So